Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a serious look into the prescient mind of Aldous Huxley, specifically his 1958 essay collection, Brave New World Revisited.
Right. It's like a check-in, isn't it? 27 years after the novel.
Exactly. Think of it as a stark reality check on that dystopian future he imagined back in 31. This wasn't just idle musing.
No, not at all. This was Cold War era, post-World War II.
Yeah, and he was seeing some uh, deeply concerning parallels between his fiction and what was actually happening.
And it's worth remembering his background. I mean, his grandfather was involved with Darwin's theory.
Right. And his great-uncle, Matthew Arnold, the critic.
So he came from this really intellectual stock, started with satire, but then, vision problems, D.H. Lawrence's influence, things got more serious.
Brave New World was that pivot. And Revisited feels like his mature, almost evidence-based reflection. A reality check, like you said.
Yeah, definitely. He's asking, were those warnings starting to come true?
Precisely. So our mission in this deep dive is to unpack Huxley's 1958 assessment. What were the core forces he identified? What did he think was nudging the world towards, or maybe away from, that chilling future?
Okay, let's get into it.
All right, let's dive in, starting with something that clearly weighed heavily on him: overpopulation.
Oh, absolutely. And what's really striking is how his own view changed.
How so?
Well, in 1931, he saw that totally organized society as like way off in the future, 6th or 7th century AS.
After Ford, yeah, their sort of god figure of industry.
Right. But by 58, he felt it was happening much faster, that the world was rushing towards it.
He even talked about the shift from the Depression era, the nightmare of too little order.
And the potential for a nightmare of too much order. A much scarier prospect in his view.
And the numbers he uses really hammer it home.
They do. When he wrote the novel, world population was under 2 billion.
By 1958, already 2.8 billion. And he projected, pretty accurately actually, about 5.5 billion by the turn of the century.
Here's the really crucial part, I think. His point about death control versus birth control.
Explain that.
Well, things like penicillin, DDT, clean water death control, relatively easy to implement, even for poorer countries. They brought down death rates fast.
Okay, makes sense.
But birth control, that's much harder. It needs individual cooperation, education, money, willpower. Plus, you're fighting against social traditions, religious beliefs.
Ah, right. So
Yeah.
the ability to stop death outpaced the ability or the willingness to manage births.
Exactly. And that imbalance, that massive acceleration in population growth, was the core of his worry.
He mentions how long it took the population to double in the past centuries.
Right, like 16 centuries between Christ and Queen Elizabeth I. But by his time, he figured it would double in less than half a century.
On a finite planet with limited resources.
That's the pressure point. Food, minerals, soil erosion. He details all of it.
And this pressure, especially in developing countries where death rates fell sharply but birth rates stayed high.
It creates huge economic insecurity. He mentions some places doubling their population in maybe just 20 years or so.
Which leads to political instability.
That's his argument. Economic chaos, social unrest. It forces governments to step in, take more control, plan everything, restrict freedoms, just to maintain order.
So overpopulation directly fuels the rise of central government power.
He thought it was almost inevitable. Even without communism, he saw this trend towards dictatorship. But with communism in the mix, he felt it made it a virtual certainty.
Wow. He actually predicted many of those developing nations would fall under totalitarian rule within a couple of decades.
Yeah, probably communist, he thought.
And he didn't see this as just their problem, did he? He saw knock-on effects for the West.
Absolutely. What happens if these new dictatorships cut off raw materials to the industrialized democracies?
Suddenly, our complex societies, reliant on those resources.
Could face collapse themselves, which might lead them to adopt totalitarian measures just to cope. It's a domino effect.
He even looked at the U.S., said it wasn't overpopulated then, in 58, but warned about the future.
Right. Continued growth could cause problems by the 21st century, but the immediate threat was indirect.
How so?
If overpopulation fueled totalitarianism elsewhere, and those regimes allied, say, with the Soviets,
It puts immense military pressure on the U.S.
which justifies more central control, a near-permanent state of military readiness, eroding liberty from within.
He also touches on something pretty controversial: the idea of average IQ potentially declining in developed nations due to different birth rates.
He does, calling it reproductive delinquency. It's quite blunt.
And he wraps up that section questioning if democracy can even survive under these pressures, either in poor, overpopulated countries or rich ones potentially facing declining vigor?
It's a heavy question, so that's the first big road to the nightmare. Overpopulation.
Okay, what's the second main driver he identifies?
Over-organization. That's his term for it.
He acknowledges technology's amazing progress, but
But sees a major downside. The concentration of power, economic and political power, piling up in big business and big government.
even in democracies.
Yeah, he says it happens there too, just maybe more. Politely. Inconspicuously.
That really hits home today, doesn't it? These massive global corporations, their sheer scale of government.
Definitely. And he brings in Eric Fromm's idea here that despite all our progress, modern Western life is actually making us less mentally healthy.
Turning people into automata.
Exactly. Compensating for a lack of real fulfillment with, constant work and shallow distractions.
And Huxley ties this back to our biology, right? Our uniqueness.
Yes. He insists we are biologically unique individuals. Any culture trying to force standardization to make everyone the same.
It's committing an outrage against man's biological nature. Strong words.
Very. He sees that human drive for order, the will to order, as useful in science or art.
But dangerous in society.
Potentially very dangerous when it comes to politics and economics. If it leads to too much control, too much rigidity.
He makes a key distinction, doesn't he? Organization is needed for liberty.
Right, a framework. But too much organization. That's when it becomes stifling. It transforms men and women into automata, suffocates the creative spirit, and abolishes the very possibility of freedom.
And complex technology sort of necessitates complex social structures.
That's the link he draws. Which then demand conformity, de-individualization. You become a cog.
And this gets worse with overpopulation, especially in big cities.
He thought so. Anonymity, relationships based on function rather than genuine connection, loneliness, loss of meaning.
Yeah.
It all feeds into it.
He contrasts human society's packs with the hive or ant-heap.
Yeah, arguing that civilization is kind of a crude imitation and trying to create a perfect social organism always ends in tyranny.
He brings up William White's The Organization Man here too, doesn't he?
Yes, the concept of the social ethic.
Where the group comes first. Adjustment, belongingness, teamwork.
All that stuff. The individual exists for the organization. Even the wife of the ideal organization man has her role prescribed.
And Huxley was critical of this.
Deeply critical. He saw it as just a way to justify the bad side effects of over-organization. It puts this abstract thing, the organization, above actual living people.
He talks about social engineers trying to manage society like machines.
And he's very skeptical they won't be corrupted by that power. He questions their basic assumptions, too, like the idea that everyone wants constant teamwork.
People are different, right? Temperamentally.
Exactly. He also dismisses those rosy views of the Middle Ages some collectivists used, pointing out the lack of freedom back then.
So ultimately, both overpopulation and overorganization erode the foundations of democracy.
That's his core argument. They undermine prosperity, liberty, the ability to reason, eroding that fair chance for self-government.
And beyond these big impersonal forces,
there are always individuals actively seeking power, using specific techniques to control others.
Which leads him away from the brute force of 1984 towards
the more manipulative methods of Brave New World. And that brings us neatly to propaganda.
Right. Propaganda in a democratic society. He starts with the basic difference. Democracy needs informed choice.
While dictatorship uses censorship, lies, appeals to emotion.
But he sees a split in the West, like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Explain that.
Well, Jekyll's the editorial side, trying for truth, reason. Hyde is advertising, exploiting irrationality for profit.
And he points out something crucial. The early champions of literacy and free press didn't really foresee
this huge mass media industry focused on, well, trivia. Distractions.
Yeah, they underestimated our almost infinite appetite for distractions, as he put it.
He contrasts the past with fewer distractions to the constant bombardment, now papers, radio, TV, movies.
Like bread and circuses in ancient Rome.
And in Brave New World, these distractions aren't accidental, are they?
No, they're deliberate policy. Keep people entertained, fascinated by irrelevancies, so they don't think about social or political reality.
So in democracies, the sheer volume of irrelevance can be just as effective a control mechanism as state censorship.
That's his chilling point. Constant immersion in these other worlds makes us vulnerable to manipulation.
While dictators use repetition and suppression.
The West risks drowning rational thought in a sea of irrelevance. Future dictators, he thought, would combine both approaches.
making them potentially even more effective than past regimes.
Possibly, yeah, because they'd have better technology and a better grasp of mind control.
He then digs into Hitler's methods, doesn't he?
He does. Hitler's intuitive grasp of mass psychology, bypassing reason, appealing directly to feelings, unconscious drives.
Using big rallies to create that mass mentality.
Right, what Huxley calls herd poisoning. People lose their reason, their moral compass, become highly suggestible.
He saw Hitler manipulating those hidden desires, much like advertisers do.
Exactly, playing on frustrations, fears. But he also notes the difference. Intellectuals, preferring reason, are often more resistant to that kind of crude propaganda.
What were Hitler's main propaganda principles, according to Huxley?
Simplify everything. Use stereotypes. Repeat constantly. Be dogmatic. Eliminate all opposition.
It's a bleak view of the masses.
Horrifying, yes. But Huxley felt Hitler, despite his cynicism, grasped a kernel of truth. Crowds can be mindless and morally vacant in ways individuals often aren't.
Okay, so from general propaganda, he narrows the focus to the arts of selling.
Right, reiterating that democracy needs informed choice, while dictatorships manipulate hidden forces.
He expands on that Jekyll and Hyde idea again, publicists giving info versus
Motivation analysts digging into our unconscious weaknesses to sell stuff, driven by consumerism.
and he asks that key question again. Can rational and irrational persuasion really coexist long-term in a democracy?
It's a central tension. He explains how these analysts study our deep desires and fears to exploit them.
He even mentions how demagogues use negative emotions like hate.
Yeah, targeting scapegoats, enemies weak enough to be persecuted using violent language to build loyalty, though commercial ads usually stick to less dangerous irrationalities.
He contrasts rational propaganda needing to understand symbols with irrational propaganda.
Which relies on not understanding symbols properly, equating the symbol with the reality.
Like the cosmetics example.
Yes.
Selling hope, not just chemicals.
Exactly, linking the product to a deep desire, like being attractive, using misleading symbols.
So find a common desire or fear
Link the product to it symbolically.
and create a compensatory dream. Buy vitality with oranges, prestige with a car.
Escape fear with toothpaste, get fellowship with booze, health with laxatives, even culture with books sometime.
He mentions disproportionately fascinating symbols too, stuff that grabs attention, even if it's not great art.
And then the power of the singing commercial.
Ah, yes. Not a new idea, he says, hymns, marching songs.
But music is just intrinsically attractive, memorable. The Orpheus-Pavlov combo, he calls it, makes even nonsense stick.
And mass media print, radio, TV lets them reach everyone.
Including kids, the unschool, who are highly suggestible, radio fodder, and television fodder.
Children becoming living, talking records of ads.
Yeah, conditioned from day one,
Yeah.
growing up to be perfectly trained consumers.
And he connects this directly to the decline of self-government.
How so?
Well, in huge populations, your individual vote feels meaningless. Power feels distant.
Ah, so political marketers step in appealing to weaknesses, not strengths,
Exactly. Using psychology, focus groups, in-depth interviews,
to find those unconscious fears and wishes.
and then craft campaigns around the candidate's image and personality, sincerity, not policies.
Creating the glamorous entertainer candidate.
Right. Who give short, simple sound bites, guaranteeing you never hear the complex truth. It sounds disturbingly familiar.
It really does. Okay, so from manipulating the masses, he moves to more direct methods, brainwashing.
He distinguishes this from crowd manipulation, right? This is about isolated individuals.
Yes, he starts with Pavlov again, conditioned reflexes, how stress leads to breakdown in animals. Their brains go on strike.
And connects this to shell shock or battle fatigue in soldiers.
Showing that everyone has a breaking point under enough stress, except maybe psychotics, ironically.
And this breaking point has been exploited historically. Torture by police, clergy.
Right, even the Nazis using torture and extermination as a horrific form of indoctrination.
But it's not just physical torture. Psychological stress works too.
Equally, maybe more so. And the goal isn't just to break someone, but to convert them.
Back to Pavlov, dogs near breakdown become highly suggestible.
And new behaviors taught then seem to stick permanently. That's the key insight for the manipulator.
So what kinds of psychological stress increase suggestibility?
Intense stimuli, long periods of suspense, confusion, things totally outside your experience, deliberate fear, rage, anxiety.
He uses John Wesley's preaching as an example, inducing terror and guilt.
Bringing people to the edge, then offering salvation, leading to conversion and changed behavior.
And the crucial point, it's the method, not the truth of the doctrine. that works.
Precisely. Anyone can be converted to anything given the right conditions.
He then details communist police methods for political prisoners.
A mix of physical and psychological stress, bad food, discomfort, no sleep, suspense.
Long interrogations to break them down.
Then the offer of hope, of being saved by accepting the party line.
He also talks about the Korean War POWs. Less brutal, maybe, but still.
Still manipulative. Harassment, guilt through confessions, and informing physical stress. Increasing suggestibility for indoctrination. He notes the high collaboration rate.
And then the really intense stuff for communist missionaries in China.
Oh, yeah. Isolation camps, exhaustion, constant surveillance, self-accusation, fear, intensive training, harsh penalties.
Leading to breakdowns, suicides, mental illness.
But also creating fanatics completely cut off from their past.
So brainwashing is this hybrid violence and psychology, a bridge between 1984 and Brave New World.
That's how he frames it, a transitional technique.
Because in a long-established dictatorship, you wouldn't need it.
The idea is, conditioning from birth, maybe even genetics, would make conversion unnecessary. Elites might get looser training, but heretics, liquidated, brainwashed, or exiled.
So brainwashing is a step on the path, not the final destination.
Exactly. Which leads him to think about less coercive, more pharmacological methods.
Chemical persuasion. Back to Brave New World's wonder drug, Soma.
The ultimate tool for social control. Happiness on tap, ensuring people are content with servitude, no rebellious thoughts.
He flips Marx's religion as the opium of the people line, doesn't he?
He does. In Brave New World, Soma is the religion. Consolation, visions, hope, faith, synthetic charity, all in a pill.
And while Soma doesn't exist,
he argues we've found fairly good substitutes, tranquilizers, hallucinogens, stimulants, many physiologically cheap.
and a dictator could easily use these politically.
Tranquilizers to keep people calm, stimulants for fake enthusiasm, hallucinogens for distraction.
Absolutely.
He even suggests just making them available might be enough. Look at alcohol and tobacco use. Despite the harms, look at the millions of tranquilizer prescriptions just to cope with modern life.
The demand is already there. We're kind of self-medicating into compliance already.
That seems to be his implication, a worrying thought.
Okay, from drugs affecting the conscious mind, he moves to influencing the unconscious, subconscious persuasion.
Starting with Dr. Poetzel's experiments with the tachistoscope, flashing images quickly.
So quickly you don't consciously see them, but details show up in dreams later, proving subconscious perception.
Exactly. And later work confirmed it. We perceive more than we realize. It gets recorded subconsciously, and it can affect our conscious thoughts and behavior.
And this science quickly became technology. Subliminal projection in movies and TV in the 50s.
That's right. Flashing words like drink Coca-Cola for milliseconds below the conscious threshold, trying to create cravings, or using inaudible whispers.
He was skeptical about the early claims, though, right? Like the popcorn sales increased.
Yeah, he questioned the scientific rigor. Said just flashing names probably wasn't very effective on its own.
But he mentions the British concept of strobonic injection.
Which stressed creating the right psychological conditions first, because suggestibility isn't constant.
What increases it?
Light hypnosis, some drugs, illness, starvation, stress.
So the scientific dictator could combine things, use suggestion-enhancing rituals or drugs, then hit people with subliminal messages.
That's the scary potential he saw. Whispering machines, projectors in schools, hospitals.
But what kind of messages work subliminally, not direct commands?
Probably not effectively, more likely to just reinforce existing beliefs.
He thinks persuasion by association is more powerful, even consciously.
Definitely. Linking your product or candidate to something already seen as good, like the aspirin ads in Guatemala using religious images.
Associating pain relief with the Holy Trinity worked better than pictures of dogs.
Because it tapped into existing positive associations, and subliminal projection is perfect for that.
He mentions those NYU experiments. Subliminally flashing happy or angry changed how people saw a face.
Making it seem friendlier or more hostile just through unconscious association. Huge implications.
Propagandists could enhance suggestibility, then subconsciously link their guy or product with goodness or happiness, manipulating feelings without awareness.
Precisely. He even thought about using it in film, flashing pain during a death scene to heighten the emotion.
And his final vision? Political meetings with subliminal tech, associating the speaker with positive symbols and opponents with negative ones.
Yeah. Lincoln and government by the people flash subconsciously for the speaker, maybe negative words for the enemies. He admits he missed putting subliminal projection in the original novel.
Okay, one more technique. Hypnopedia.
Sleep teaching.
He starts with that 1957 experiment with prisoners listening to moral messages all night.
Just like in Brave New World, where sleep teaching was used for ethical conditioning. Right. He explains early attempts failed because they tried teaching facts during sleep, which doesn't work. Sleep isn't for intellectual learning.
But moral training, words without reason, swallowed by the sleeping brain.
That's what worked in the novel, a powerful way to install basic social principles, especially in the lower castes.
But then he discusses actual scientific analysis from the 50s. Simon and Emmons.
Yeah, they reviewed the studies and were pretty skeptical, concluded there wasn't strong proof of learning during actual sleep. Maybe in a sort of drowsy, half-awake state people don't remember later.
So not quite the sci-fi version.
Maybe not exactly.
Yeah.
The definition of sleep itself was a problem for the research, but he also notes the U.S. Army apparently did use sleep instruction for Morse code and languages during WWII, seemingly with success.
And people were already selling pillow speakers for self-improvement, learning lines, speeches, self-help stuff.
Right, suggesting a belief in it, or at least a market for it.
And his point for dictators, even if it's only, say, 10% effective.
On a captive audience, prisoners, soldiers, people in waiting rooms, the sheer numbers mean you could still influence a lot of people over time.
He then pivots slightly to suggestibility in general when we're awake.
Citing the Buddhist idea that most of us are half asleep anyway, easily influenced.
And emphasizing again our unique individuality. No average man.
Suggestibility varies hugely between people. Genetics, environment play roles. Extreme resistance is rare, but so is extreme suggestibility. Most are somewhere in the middle.
But he asks, is freedom compatible with high suggestibility? Can democracy survive mind manipulation?
And can education or laws effectively control it? Big questions he leaves hanging there.
Which brings us to his final chapter.
Yeah.
What can be done?
He starts strong. Heredity matters as much as culture. We're biologically unique. Freedom and tolerance are good. Regimentation is bad. Simple as that.
But dictators, organization men, some scientists, they want uniformity.
He thinks so. He critiques extreme environmentalists like Watson or Skinner, who downplayed heredity and individual agency. Skinner suggesting Elizabethan England wrote Shakespeare.
As opposed to William James or Bertrand Russell, who saw individuals as key historical forces.
Exactly. Huxley sides with them. Mind bodies are different. Individuals affect their environment. History isn't just economics or politics. Important people matter too.
Everything is done by individuals, influenced by culture, but using it uniquely because of their biology.
He mentions Roger Williams's work on innate biochemical and other differences, contrasting it with the common social science idea of infants being uniform blank slates.
And argues that ethics and policies need to be based on this reality of difference.
Critiquing that social ethic again for ignoring individuality, which then justifies suppressing liberty for the collective.
He contrasts human societies, organizations of individuals with insect colonies, organisms. We resist total uniformity.
Referencing things like Sheldon's body types as examples of innate variation.
He reminds us how Brave New World achieved uniformity. Genetic engineering plus conditioning.
And while genetic standardization isn't here yet, he warns that big government and big business will soon have all the other mind manipulation tools.
And they'll be tempted to use them to impose uniformity. Economic pressure, threats, psychological techniques.
Unless we actively educate for freedom and self-government, that's the only defense.
Education specifically in analyzing propaganda, seeing through the tricks.
Yes. Language is powerful, for good and ill. It lets us think abstractly, turn emotions into principles.
We use words to label reality, build worldviews.
Realistic behavior needs an accurate worldview and smart use of language. Flawed systems, misunderstood words lead to disaster.
He says the materials for good language education exist.
But we don't systematically teach kids to tell truth from falsehood, sense from nonsense. A huge failing.
He mentions that Institute for Propaganda Analysis from the 30s.
And how it got shut down. War, but also objections from educators, too cynical. Military soldiers questioning orders. Clergy, advertisers.
Because the social order kind of depends on people uncritically accepting some propaganda from authorities.
There's the rub. We need a balance. Enough suggestibility to function socially, but not enough to be manipulated. Enough analysis to spot lies, but not so much we reject all tradition.
He says analysis isn't enough. We need positive values too.
Based on facts. Individual freedom, because we're diverse. Charity, compassion, because we need love. Intelligence, to achieve love and freedom. use these to judge propaganda.
He suggests a habeas mentum legal protection for mental freedom, like habeas corpus for physical freedom.
Maybe laws limiting sleep teaching, banning subliminal ads, restricting irrational political propaganda.
But he's not optimistic these laws would be enough.
No. He fears the momentum of overpopulation and overorganization is too strong. Democracy might survive in form.
But hide in a liberal reality, a new kind of nonviolent totalitarianism.
That's his fear. And he asks the killer question, do we even want to act? Citing polls showing young people happy with expert rule if their lifestyle is maintained.
Like the dodo losing the ability to fly because food was easy. Indifference to freedom.
And quoting Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor, people will trade freedom for security and happiness.
Maybe that changes if things get bad. People demand liberty again.
Perhaps. But future dictators will be much better equipped. Better science, better tech for mind manipulation.
His final, chilling thought. A truly scientific dictatorship might never be overthrown.
Because people will be conditioned to love their servitude, they won't even dream of revolution.
So, to wrap up our deep dive, Huxley revisited his future and saw these powerful forces: overpopulation, overorganization, propaganda, brainwashing, chemical persuasion, subconscious manipulation, hypnopedia.
All pushing, in his 1958 view, towards that controlled dystopia. The core tension. Social order versus individual freedom.
And the question he leaves us with, maybe even more relevant now.
Given all the technological and psychological advances since he wrote, how much closer are we? Where do we need to be most vigilant to protect liberty and real democracy?
It really is about that balance, isn't it? Between society's needs and our own autonomy in this complex world. Something crucial for you, the listener, to keep thinking about.